After 1914, a massive immigrant population arrived to Argentina, mostly from Italy and Spain, almost doubling the Argentine population. There was then a need for political representation of these new laborers, which the pre-existing political parties who mostly catered to the middle and upper classes would not agree to represent, as many of the immigrants were not Argentine citizens who could vote. This was also a time in which new military men, mostly uncharismatic colonels, were looking for opportunities to make a name for themselves as generals and even striving to be presidents of Argentina. This involvement of the military in government were from the very first coup in Argentina in 1930, in which the democratic government was overthrown. Juan Perón took the opportunity to stay out of the limelight for a time while he became Secretariat of Labor and Social Security, making sure that the Argentine people, who would later become his people, understood that the resources they received from the government were actually associated with him. As the military men in the political circles noticed Perón's growing ambitions, they jailed him in Isla Martín Garcia. A socialist leader of the meat union, Cipriano Reyes, fought for Juan's release as masses began to demand his presidency, leading him to the Casa Rosada, the Argentine government house.
Take yourself back to Argentina in the 1940s. How would your position be different as a working-class average Argentinian? To better understand Peronismo, we have to look into what it was that really made up Perón's charisma. Many historians tie Perón's populist appeal with the structural ties to the Catholic Church, his relationship with the military, or in relation to race. What can we learn about Peronismo from a qualitative point of view, though? Historian Kors points to Perón's down-to-earth image as Perón the provider, his use of prosaic register in his language, and, in the end, his propaganda machine glorified the descamisados, the people that followed him rather than Perón himself. From today's vantage point, these ideas may not seem revolutionary, but Perón, in his context, was a new kind of leader. Perón redefined the relationship between power and people.
How would you describe Perón's personality in 5 adjectives?
5 words. Charisma, amazing engagement with large groups of people. He was an excellent reader of the people. Second, opportunity. He was an excellent guy to be pragmatic and see how the opportunities were coming. The third one, short-sighted. He did not have too much education or knowledge or rounded with people. Some people have no credentials, education. That's okay, but he didn't round himself with people with knowledge. I think he was pretty much egocentric. He was extremely afraid to lose the power and leadership in his party. Actually, he didn't create the party. He said it was a movement. So there was no institutions inside that movement. It was not a party like Renew People or both representatives. It was not like that. Actually the Peronism was assembled to the idea of the military. He called militants for the people who was in the movement, and they should obey and follow instructions. And the last one, I think he was a little bit greedy. I think he was pretty much materialistic. Not really how to say, spiritually or I don't know. He was not really a leader with big inspirations, I really think.
Clearly, there are mixed views of Perón, the man, with his strengths and his weaknesses. Creating the image of Perón was a delicate game. He had to be, on the one hand, an awe-inspiring leader that commanded a country. But this is also countered by, on the other hand, an anchoring in his actions. What would Perón do? What could he do? According to Kors, his basic message was, Perón gets things done, and he does them for you. The second part, he does them for you, shows the limits of Perón's deification. This was a populist movement, and Perón couldn't be out of touch with his followers. This element was done through Perón's constant campaign-like and mediated interactions with the public, as well as a glorification of the pueblo, the descamisados themselves. And so, Perónist charisma came out of Juan Perón himself, but it also came to be as a mirror to the peoples themselves. His claim to authority was inextricably linked to those people whose strength, wisdom, and love for freedom and country that he channeled. This balancing act placed Perón as both an unquestionable leader and simultaneously the embodiment of the everyman Argentino.
Juan and Eva Perón understood that the Argentine people listened to the radio intently and found a way into their everyday lives through the radio as well as by amplifying it with microphones at their massive assemblies. The microphone was such an effective medium for Evita that she is constantly photographed speaking into one and is depicted on the side of the Ministry of Health building in Buenos Aires today. The radio was also a tool that created distance, much like one can see in the chapter's documents. Eva Perón broadcasted her renouncement of the vice president's position that had been forced upon her by her own descamisados. Both Juan and Eva knew the intimate effect of their voices upon the Argentine people and used this relatively new technological tool to weave themselves into the lives of the descamisados and anyone else who, in the politically divided country, felt represented by a popular politician.
In my opinion, I think that the effect of the radio was very powerful, and at that time, radio theaters, it means basically comedies or novels spoken on the radio, were very popular and very influential. And that was because people only had the radio, and also I think that allowed people to create their own imaginary on their perception of the sounds and the words. Yes, it's true that was an extremely powerful instrument emotionally over the people to get their engagement and make them feel that they were listened and they were important. They feel that the message was for them, but in reality it was not like that, because it was their imagination of what that political regime was and not the reality. For example, at that time, one specific newspaper was burned, La Prensa, and the other newspapers were not able to publish anything quite accurate. And I know that because my grandparents work in the newspaper, okay? And it's not that. So there was people actually making censorship in the newspapers. So it was terrible.
The us versus them mentality is a key concept to populism. The leader of a political party, in this instance Perón, identified a divide in the population, usually a criticism of the elite by someone who represents the people, the common folk. Perón identified a division between the working class and the oligarchy. The creation of an us versus them mentality helped Perón get into office and retain his presidency for 3 terms. At the time in Argentina, the lower class was desperate for social and economic change, which Perón was glad to implement. He was charismatic and spoke in such a way that the uneducated lower class could understand, but with enough figurative language to appeal to the educated upper class. As with any populist leader, Perón identified an us versus them mentality, but he was not polarizing. He opposed the oligarchy, but did not treat them as an enemy. Ultimately, this led to his downfall. He tried to promise everything to everyone, but this is impossible, and led to Latin America's favorite problem, broken promises. Eventually, he had to make a choice between these groups, and he chose the oligarchy.
I would say that at that time, the confrontation between the Peronism and the mid-class and the upper level classes with more money was direct. Was like a boxing match without gloves, where now the professionalism is lost, there's no more rules, and anything can happen.
In as much of a hero as Juan Perón may have seemed when standing beside Eva, as they both motivated the people of Argentina with their inspirational and adorning words of promised change, Juan Perón and his decisions and policies actually had a huge and devastating impact on Argentines and their economy. His government's fiscal decisions were poorly made, which led to high wages and a lack of economic growth that halted the economy in the early to mid-1950s. The past promises of social reform and government sponsoring came to an abrupt end and created one of many sources of anger and a call for the removal of Perón. The people of Argentina had become used to a certain form of lifestyle that did not involve austerity, nor was it something they wanted to return to. However, with decreased productivity and increased debt, the economy was in a place of near collapse. The current situation of political unrest and volatility did nothing to encourage the urges of foreign investors to bring much-needed business to Argentina, and so perpetuated the problem. Perón made enemies with the church when he, for political purposes, chose to take religion out of the classrooms, tried to legalize prostitution and divorce, as well as making accusations towards bishops and priests, suggesting that they were attempting to thwart his leadership. In doing so, Perón equally infuriated the Navy, as most were Catholic, making an enemy that would eventually bring about the deaths of hundreds of innocent civilians and also his exile. On June 16, 1955, in an attempt to remove Perón from government, the Argentine Navy bombed the Plaza de Mayo, killing 306 people and injuring many more who were there supporting Perón in his last-ditch attempt to save his position in power. In retaliation to this attack, the largest ever of its kind in Argentine history, Peronists took to the streets and started burning churches with gasoline supplied from the nation. Although previous to these events Perón had been losing his popularity, these brutal events became the final nails in the coffin of Juan Perón's second presidency. After Perón, Argentina was left in a state of constant threats of violence, weak leadership, and a general lack of understanding of how dire the situation the country was in. For 20 years, the country was ruled by the military, and upon his short return from exile in 1973, Perón did little to help the nation. He was troubled by poor health and died in 1974, leaving his third wife, Isabella, a woman with no political experience, in charge. She was quickly ousted from government by a junta who would initiate some of the darkest moments in Argentine history in their continuation of the Dirty War.
In your opinion, how do you think Peronism has affected Argentina as a nation?
So the consequences was an inversion of values, in my opinion. For the people who understood and had critical thinking, Peronism is a wound, something bad that happened, and you try to heal, but it's difficult. The positions in the party and in the government were massively given based on political loyalty, and that was until 2 years ago. Mm. So that's terrible, because instead having the most capable people to do the job in the government or in the government-owned companies, you have people that are just yes sir people. This is changed by entitlement. And that's why Argentina has a low productivity, has a very uneven output. The main Argentina that we had is a weak country in terms of competitiveness and the capability to progress.